Eyes wide open. If you think Dogman is just a legend, keep watching. From shadowy figures stalking rural backroads, from towering wolf-like creatures emerging from the tree line, these sightings have left witnesses shaken, speechless, and forever changed. If you've ever wondered what really growls in the wilderness after sunset, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's take a look.
This is not a test. Reports are spreading across the state. Sightings in the North Woods. Strange transmissions near the lake shore. If you're listening to this transmission, you're a part of the awakening. Truth is a frequency most people tune out, but once you hear it, it's like an infection. Welcome to
In the world of the mysterious and unexplained, one legend has persisted through the ages, the enigmatic Dogman. Originating from ancient myths and cultures worldwide, the canine-human hybrid has left its mark on history. In the age of the internet, the Dogman mystery continues to evolve. The legend of Dogman persists, leaving us to wonder, are we truly alone in the shadows?
I had a lady years ago, I called the episode The Roof Walker, and I feel like that was a Dogman entity. I'm not sure if we actually had the bravery back then to call it Dogman, because I remember when I first started the show, I kind of thought Dogman was ridiculous.
Right.
I was like, Bigfoot's for sure. Dogman, I don't know. Because I never had an opportunity to talk to people that had experiences with Dogman, because I came from this Bigfoot culture world. And it wasn't until like in the episode 50 something or 40 something, I had my first person who contacted me about their Dogman encounter. It was like a week or two in between the two people. It was both women. And the details that were so similar between the two ladies sharing their experiences with this Dogman creature. If I remember correctly, it was just different parts of the country. They were both little girls when it happened. And the characteristics and the interaction was so similar that I started thinking, this is interesting, you know? Maybe the whole idea of werewolves isn't so much just Hollywood, but comes from some kind of reality. I didn't really have a scope or parameters to put it in. I remember that's when I had my first opportunity to talk to somebody, wanted to like give detail.
I've seen physical beings that are definitely not like our animals up here come out of these spaces from inside the earth. I've seen in deep underground military bases, dogmen, like you would kind of describe them, some more humanized. And I think a lot of those were experimentation and genetic splicing. I think a lot of that was gene editing stuff that I've seen. But I do believe that some of these things are holdovers from the old days. They're the last of their kinds, and they've been breeding them, right? And I believe that that's the stuff that's prophesied that's going to come back out and cause the hearts of men to stop for fear of looking after these things that are coming up on the earth. You know, that's why everywhere I went throughout my youth, I could go to these tunnels and these caves and call out, and I could hear them and they would call back, you know, and it's like, it's a seductive power that draws you back into it.
You could call out to them? Like, yeah. Was it like a language or a sound or what?
Oh yeah, man. You can learn to call to them. You can go out here in these hills out here and do it. You can still do it tonight on these full moons and stuff. You can start calling out and you'll think you'll hear coyotes at first. And then all of a sudden it's a totally different, you know, it's a different sound that starts to resonate. And then it's a different one that calls off from over here, right? You got to understand, some of these guys that you think are just neighbors and stuff, or just people, this is what they keep in their barn. This stuff they keep. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I go out hunting for these things.
Well, we're here with Dave, and he's going to be recounting an experience that him and one of his friends had when they were out here this summer. So what time of the year was it? Like,
it was about midsummer.
Midsummer? Okay.
Yep.
Now, what were you guys doing out here? Just fishing, or?
When we came out here, it was actually during when we were still in high school.
Okay.
And we came out here to do community service.
Oh, nice.
So, and it was something we were required to do for one of our classes.
Yeah.
And we hiked in. We were actually with another employee from the school that took us in here to go do it. And on the way back, it was really quiet, you know, especially if it was summer. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that it sounded like something was following us the entire time. And as we continued to hike out, like, we would stop, and occasionally we would hear something walk and it would stop. And then it finally started to, you know, as we walked, it would walk the same pace as us. And it sounded like it was learning to like match our pace. So when we would stop, it would stop.
So something definitely bipedal. It wasn't four-legged. It wasn't a deer or anything.
Yeah. And I mean, this was like an hour and a half hike out. So it followed us for the hour and a half. Wow. It wasn't until we got here, and as we were making it the way, down through here, it was so thick in this area here that you couldn't see into it because there's leaves on it. But we could hear something just on the other side of this little ridge. And I could also, like, how the strong smell of wet dog?
Yeah.
This was like 10 times worse than like you find like on a typical dog that's been like out playing in the mud.
Yeah.
Way, way worse.
Okay, wow.
And I actually saw something moved, through the tree. There was a black coloration, and I only caught like a quick glimpse of it. But Corey, when he was here with me, he could hear it. He didn't see it. So,
wow.
At that point, I kind of got, the chills. Usually when it feels like something's wrong, chills run down the back of your neck. And we picked up our pace and started moving, and it still followed us.
Wow.
And once we got to where our cars are parked, it stopped because it opened up. And that's when we kind of heard it like grunt and growl, I guess.
Wow.
And I kind of looked through the grass trying to see it, and I remember catching a glimpse of like 2 ears, and that was it.
So were they like pointed? Were they rounded?
Oh, they're pointed.
So
it's definitely canine type ears.
Wow. So we're not talking a Bigfoot here. We're talking something that is like a wolf-human hybrid kind of thing?
The Dogman.
The Dogman.
Yep.
Wow.
But he said he could always tell when this other group of what he called the bear men would move in because the good Bigfoot would just leave out. I had a friend, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, that grew up in South Alabama, who mentioned the bear man. He called him the bear man, which could be a good way. But they had what he said was the regular boogers on their property that didn't mess with much. Occasionally they'd get a chicken or they would, get crops out of the fields, but that's about the extent of it. But he said he could always tell when this other group of what he called the bear men would move in because the good Bigfoot would just leave out. And he said, his grandfather would tell him, hey, stay out of the woods right now. Don't be outside after dark. They'll be here for a month or two, and then they'll be gone. So, just try not to get them stirred up. And he finally got a good look at one. He didn't pay his granddaddy any attention and stepped outside one night to do something. And he was within 10 foot of one. And that's what he described was a shortened muzzle, kind of a more bear looking features. And he said it was growling at him, showing its teeth to him. And, of course, he ran right back in the house.
I was just sitting there looking around, and a couple seconds later, not too much longer, but the tapping started again. And it was not just like a click, click. It was clicking pretty much at me. And then I looked at the window and I noticed 2 huge red eyes. And the clicking stopped, and I was looking at these eyes, and I really couldn't understand at that time because, like I said, I was under 5. And in my little brain, I was trying to figure out what could be looking in the window. How is a dog looking in our window? I couldn't understand why my mother wasn't waking up. And as we're staring at each other, it started the tapping again. It must have put its face a little bit closer to the window because then out of the darkness, you could see a smile. You could definitely see white teeth. And then I was so terrified.
Hey guys, if you're from Columbus, Ohio, or Worthington, Westerville, really any parts of Ohio, and you have witnessed this yourself, please let me know in the comments. Because this was not a phantom sighting, okay? This was real. This happened in 2013. Me and my boys went for a Sunday night walk, okay? And it's around 10 o'clock at night, I was just trying to help them burn off some energy before bed. We're coming back. And mind you, where we live, there's like the Alum Creek Trail woods. So we are near, some woods and stuff. At the end of the road where we're walking towards, we see this huge, at first I didn't know what it was, y'all. I didn't know if it was a bobcat. At first I thought it was a Great Dane, but I'm like, wait a minute. Great Danes are tall. This thing was so big. It was long. Man, this thing had to be, if it stood up, at least 6 feet. But it was on all fours, you guys. I've never seen a bobcat now, I know bobcats can get big. I know they can. But the way it walked, it was like, it looked like a dog, but it moved like a cat. Now, we're 4 blocks away from it. It's crossing the street, and I seen it jump over that fence out of a backyard, and it's headed, across the street, and it's getting ready to go in between this house and garage. Halfway across the street, it stopped, y'all, and it looked at us, and we stopped. We all stood still because we didn't know if we were about to have to run, like if it was going to pursue us. I've seen Great Danes. I've seen many of bobcats, but I know there's some hunters in Ohio, and I know you guys know about this wildlife. Did me and my boys see the Dogman? I've always wondered. One last detail. We've never seen it again.
What killed an entire family at Land Between the Lakes? We're going to dive into the strange and terrifying mysteries that surround this place and even hear from a retired police officer who did his own investigations. Let's begin. On a warm spring evening in the early 1980s, a family of 4 set up their campsite in the Land Between the Lakes, which is this massive recreation area that straddles the Kentucky-Tennessee border. This family, just an average American family, was a father, a mother, a teenage son, and a young daughter who was about 5 years old. They had pulled up their motorhome near the lakeshore where they were planning to spend the night. Now, the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL, as it's come to be known by, is a massive 170,000-acre area with rolling woodlands and shoreline. During the day, it's this peaceful paradise where people go camping and boating and fishing, but at night, the woods get really dark and very quiet, and it's kind of like stepping back in time to the frontier days. So this family, they're just having a relatively normal camping evening. They're sitting around the campfire, they're toasting marshmallows, and they're unaware that there's something watching them from the woods nearby, something dangerous. And what happened this evening would become one of the most disturbing incidents in the area's history, even though you won't find any official records of it anywhere. By early the next morning, a scene of absolute horror was discovered at the campsite. The family's motorhome was completely torn apart. The door had been ripped right off its hinges, and the entire interior was just soaked with blood. And when you looked inside, you could see that the father, the mother, and the teenage son had all been slaughtered, and their bodies were so badly mutilated that they were barely recognizable. But perhaps the most disturbing part was that the little girl, the 5-year-old daughter, was missing. She wasn't in the motorhome with the rest of her family, and when police arrived, they just couldn't process what they were seeing. There were shredded pieces of clothing and severed limbs scattered all around the area, and one of the officers would later say that it looked less like a crime scene and more like the lair of some wild animal. Initially, the officers just thought it was a bear attack or maybe a mountain lion. I mean, what else could possibly do this kind of damage to an entire family? But then one of the coroners who came to the scene pointed out something really strange. And he said that the depth and spacing of the bite wounds and the claw marks just didn't match any known predators in the area. For context, bears were thought to be completely gone from this region at the time, and no wolf or cougar could possibly cause this kind of devastation. The coroner showed the officers these 4 deep gashes across what they believed was the father's torso, and he said these claw marks were at least 2 inches apart, and the bite wounds they were seeing, the jaw dimensions were way bigger than a wolf or a mountain lion. And so the officers are trying to figure this out, and they're searching the area with their flashlights, and initially they count 3 victims, the father, the mother, and the son. But then one of the deputies comes out of the darkened motorhome holding this blood-stained tiny dress, and he yells out that there is a 4th victim. They need to look for the little girl who might still be alive. Immediately, search teams start spreading out into the trees, and they're calling out the little girl's name, hoping that maybe she got scared and ran away and, is hiding somewhere nearby. And for just a moment, there's this sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, that there's a survivor. But one of the officers screams from somewhere nearby, and everyone runs over to him. What they find is horrifying. The officer had discovered the little girl's remains, but they weren't on the ground. They were up in a tree, and there was just a tiny hand and a leg with a white sock dangling from one of the branches. And when they got her body down, they could see that she had been partially eaten. And there were these clumps of coarse dark brown and gray fur found in her little hands and embedded in the tree bark where she had apparently tried to hold on. The officers were just completely baffled by the scene, and one of them suggests that maybe it was a rogue grizzly bear that had somehow wandered far outside its normal range, even though that seemed practically impossible. Another assumed that maybe it was a pack of feral dogs, but the thing is, all the evidence, especially the massive claw marks, pointed to a single attacker of some kind, one with unprecedented size and strength. But before these officers could even make sense of what they were looking at, a bunch of dark, unmarked vehicles suddenly showed up at the scene, and a group of men got out. They didn't introduce themselves or explain who they were, but they just took charge immediately. They told the local police and the rescue workers that they were relieved and they could now leave. According to stories that were later shared, these mysterious investigators gave very explicit orders. They told everyone not to speak about what they had seen to anyone, especially not to the media. And the local officers, who were already completely traumatized by what they had seen, they just nodded and left without arguing. By sunrise, the entire campsite had been cleaned up like nothing had ever happened. But despite the attempts to keep everything quiet, the story still got out through whispers and rumors. There was a gas station attendant named Jan Thompson who was working the night shift nearby. And around 4 or 5 in the morning, right after everything had happened, 2 of the police officers who had been at the scene pulled into her gas station. And Jan could see right away that something was terribly wrong. One of the officers got out of the car and immediately just vomited in the parking lot, and the other one was just sitting there on the curb trembling. So Jan ran out to help them. She gave them some water and a towel, and they were just mumbling about something that they never thought was possible. And Jan noticed that their faces and their uniforms still had dried blood splatters on them, and they wouldn't tell her exactly what had happened, but they did say that an entire family had been slaughtered in their camper, and that they had been mysteriously just torn to shreds by something with teeth and claws. One of the officers just kept repeating over and over that they had never seen anything like that before, and that was it. Then they went silent. Well, about a month later, these same officers came back to Jan's gas station, and they seemed to be in much better spirits, but they gave her a warning, and they told her that, off the record, the lab tests that had been done on Heron's saliva samples from the scene couldn't be matched to any known species. The closest comparison was to a wolf, but the wolves hadn't lived in Kentucky or Tennessee for decades, and certainly not one that could do that level of damage. And so they just warned Jan to be careful and to never repeat what they had told her. Over time, this incident became infamous local lore around the Land Between the Lakes area. There were never any public police reports or newspaper articles about it, nothing official to confirm that it even happened. Some people speculated that the victims were probably tourists from out of state and that their deaths were just quietly attributed to some random criminal attack to avoid drawing negative attention. Others believed there was a deliberate cover-up to protect the area's tourism industry, which would make sense. And after all, the Land Between the Lakes was economically important for the region, and news of some monster tearing people apart would definitely scare people away. Interestingly, some people recall that an entire campground area in the LBL, often referred to as the Moss Creek site, was suddenly shut down around the same time with no explanation beyond some vague concerns about safety. The facilities there, which were relatively new, were just abandoned and left to be reclaimed by the forest. And so rumors began to spread that something dangerous was loose in that area, and authorities knew about it but were purposely keeping quiet. The complete lack of official information only made speculation grow wilder. People began asking questions. Was it some unknown animal, maybe a cryptid, or what? Or was it something even more fantastical, like a werewolf, or what some people call a dogman, which is a creature that most people would say shouldn't exist at all. The story about the family being killed in the 1980s isn't the only one from this area. The Land Between the Lakes has a long and strange history that goes all the way back to before it was even called that. Long before LBL was a park for campers and hikers, it was a wilderness known as Between the Rivers. And the area was first inhabited by Native American tribes and then later by scattered settlers who moved in. And the earliest legends of some kind of beast in these parts actually trace all the way back to the original inhabitants of the land. The Shawnee tribe, who hunted and lived in this region, told stories about this strange creature that dwelt there. They described like what the French would call a loup-garou, which is their term for a werewolf. And the Shawnee would actually warn French trappers and other outsiders back in the 1700s to stay away from certain areas, hinting that there was some kind of evil presence that prowled in the woods. You can just imagine a French fur trader around 1760 sitting by his campfire on a lonely night, and across the fire, his Shawnee guide is just sharing the story, and the guide tells him about a powerful shaman from his tribe who had the ability to shapeshift into a wolf. But this shaman, at least according to the story, turned malevolent. Maybe he abused his power, or maybe he was driven mad by it. So the tribe decided the shaman had to be stopped. They banded together and they killed him while he was in his wolf form. But the thing is, the shaman's cursed spirit survived, and it was doomed to roam these forests forever as this half-man, half-wolf specter that was constantly seeking vengeance against people. Now, for trappers and pioneers back then, these weren't just superstitions. The frontier was full of very real dangers. Wild animals, dangerous people. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, some of the first Europeans to even come to between the rivers reported some really strange events. Their livestock would go missing, or they'd turn up all mauled and torn apart. You had hunters who would be tracking deer, and they'd follow the tracks into a clearing, only to find the deer dead and just torn to shreds, like it had been attacked by some huge predator. At nighttime, some people talked about these long howls that were just like these haunting cries. There were early French explorers that wrote about being unnerved by what they called le loup-garou in these woods, a wolf man that supposedly howled at the moon and left half-eaten bison carcasses in its wake. And these accounts noted that even the brave Shawnee guides were really wary of certain areas after dark. There's this often cited bit of folklore from that era where Shawnee traders apparently refused to hunt in the interior of what's now LBL. They would only skirt around its edges, and they would mutter about the shadow that carries off the hunters. And in the 1800s, when folklore and reality often kind of blended together, the stories continued to evolve. One of the most enduring legends is that of the Wolf family of Land Between the Rivers. As the story goes, this man of European descent came to this isolated region in the mid-1800s. He was supposedly this educated man from abroad, but he carried some kind of dark curse. Maybe it was clinical lycanthropy, which is a condition where someone believes they transform into a wolf, or maybe it was some hereditary condition that gave him these beast-like tendencies at night. But regardless, he built a homestead deep in the woods, took a wife, and had kids. And over the years, people talked that this family just wasn't right, that they were rarely seen in town except for when they needed supplies. People spoke that this man's posture seemed a bit hunched, and that his teeth were unusually yellow and sharp. And at night, livestock from neighboring farms would vanish, and these howls would kind of just echo from the direction of the family's homestead. And one by one, neighbors began moving away, and the family remained isolated. Sometime around the early 1900s, the howling stopped. People who dared to venture near the property just found it abandoned, as if the family had just picked up and left. And some people thought that maybe an angry mob of townsfolk confronted the family and there was this terrible fight, under a full moon. But others speculated that maybe a disease or affliction had run its course and ended the bloodline. But a more chilling version of the story claimed that one night the family transformed into wolves entirely, giving in fully to the curse, and ran off into the wild. No bodies were ever found, and so the tale of the wolf family became this kind of staple campfire story. Interestingly, by the early 20th century, sightings of a wolf man or hairy beast in between the rivers were still being passed around. And even in the 1930s and 40s, farmers occasionally blamed missing cattle or pigs on this beast, claiming they found the pens broken open and bloody paw prints all around. There was a group of elderly men in Grand Rivers, Kentucky, who recalled in the 1980s how, as boys, they'd seen calves savagely torn apart in the fields, with limbs strewn about and bite marks on the carcasses. And they said that, peering out their windows on moonlit nights, a few of them claimed to have seen this kind of looming figure that was prowling near their barns, taller than a man, walking on two legs, but completely covered in fur. But of course, while there's a lot of people that have sightings and stories of their own, a lot of people don't take these tales seriously, of course. Skeptics now and then attributed these strange animal-like behavior and howling to coyotes or panthers and animal attacks and, like bobcats or feral dogs. But in lore, at least the local lore, a pattern was clearly established that Between the Rivers was clearly home to a mysterious predator. However, it wasn't until around 1963 when President John F. Kennedy designated it as a national recreation area, and before then, the land between the lakes just didn't exist. Well, at least on paper, the name. This administrative change completely transformed the region in ways that some people believe might have stirred up whatever mysterious forces were already there. When they created LBL, they built these massive dams that formed kind of two large lakes, and in the process, they ended up swallowing entire towns and displacing hundreds of families. Over 700 families were literally forced to sell their land and leave in the 1960s. Imagine generations of your family living somewhere, and suddenly Big Brother tells you that you have to leave because you're going to be flooded out. And many of the old residents who were forced out, even their descendants today, actually feel that the beast legend is kind of an affront to their real history. If you wander through LBL today, you'll still find all these relics of people who lived there, crumbling stone foundations that are just being engulfed by the forest, these lonely family cemeteries with tombstones dating back to the 1800s. I mean, the past is quite literally buried in LBL, which gives the whole area this aura of being haunted by memories. But other people believe that this displacement and trauma that birthed LBL might actually feed its paranormal energy. Ghost stories have sprouted up everywhere. Visitors occasionally report strange lights in abandoned cemeteries or even the feeling of being watched near these ruined farmsteads. But perhaps one of the most strangest, and there's many what I would consider most strangest things, is that park rangers have had plenty of strange moments. While officials publicly deny any evidence of a beast, off the record, some will acknowledge that weird things happen in LBL. Hikers get really creeped out by growls that seem to come from nowhere. Rangers occasionally find animal carcasses that look more like ritual sacrifices than just typical predation. And in fact, I interviewed a guest about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, who had his own strange experiences in the LBL.
My name is D.A. Roberts. I've been investigating cryptids since I was a kid. Spent most of my adult life in one uniform or another. I was in law enforcement for the better part of 20 years. Served as a corrections officer, a security officer. I led a hospital security detachment. I was a supervisor, a patrol supervisor. I've run the gamut. I've been everything but pretty much a detective. I didn't go into that, but I've always enjoyed the work. It was something I was always proud of, something I was always pretty good at. And I kind of had to keep most of that quiet while I was still active, because that's not the kind of thing you want to get brought up on the witness stand when you're trying to put somebody in jail for a crime. But you don't want the prosecuting attorney or the defense attorney going, "Tell me about your Bigfoot research," and making you look like an idiot on the defense stand. But we still did a lot of investigating. My sons and I, friends and I, we would still get out in the woods. We just kept it quiet. And I found that if you could get most officers away from a formal setting, a lot of cops had stories. I would go to training seminars. Would go to training seminars, and I would meet officers from other agencies, and I would say, "Hey, what do you think about this kind of thing?" And sometimes I'd get, "Oh, that's crap," but you'd be surprised the number of times I'd be like, "Hey, I'll tell you a story, but you can't tell my name, and you can't say what department I'm with, because I'm still active, and this could really bite me in the butt." I've talked to judges who had stories. I've talked to lawyers who've had stories, a couple of doctors who had stories. People that with a lot to lose by coming forward. Cause, when you're a seated judge or a prosecuting attorney or something like that, your credibility is every ounce on the line. And the last thing you want is somebody dragging, "Oh, so you saw Bigfoot, huh?" But a lot of these guys would tell you stories just on the condition that you just not ever reveal who they were publicly. A lot of them said, after I retire years from now, I'll probably tell the story publicly. And if you're still doing what you're doing, I'd be happy to do something a little more public. But until I retire, no chance. Talked to guys from Missouri Department of Conservation. I've talked to people that were just family friends that I never would have imagined had seen something like that and had never ever mentioned it in family circles. But when you get them alone, like going deer hunting, you get guys at deer camp, they'll tell you stories. So I've been really digging into this mystery for a very long time, primarily Bigfoot. Probably within the last 10 years is when I started getting into Dogman. I'd heard stories about, Wolfman and wild wolfmen of the woods and things like that. And there's even a local Ozarks legend of the beast of the lake, which is supposedly seen up near Lake of the Ozarks. But it wasn't something I really truly got into, as much as I had Bigfoot. All that kind of changed when I started researching some of the books. I started looking at some of the more, shall we say, infamous Dogman stories, like the multiple incidents that have happened in Land Between the Lakes. So after I retired, this was about 2 years ago, but in 2 years ago, July, I decided that I was going to make a trip to Land Between the Lakes.
Folks, D.A. Roberts, we made it. Land Between the Lakes.
One, to research books, and two, just to really kind of experience the place for myself. I was, arranging to meet a friend of mine, Nick Valente. I was going to meet him there, but I beat him there by about 3 days. I was there for the better part of a week, and Nick got there on, I think, my third day there. So the first couple of days I was just running around LBL by myself, which, retrospect, probably not the brightest thing I've ever done in my life. Especially since you're not supposed to go armed in a national preserve like that. I'm not saying I was completely unarmed, but I wasn't carrying anything serious. So I was still at the mercy of the elements, and I had some weird things happen. While recording near the Nickel Cemetery, I've just had my camera set up on a tripod. You can see me stop and look off of camera several times as I'm hearing something moving around. And at a couple points, you can actually hear something crunching in the leaves. So I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of out here by myself, and I've got nothing really to defend myself. So maybe this is probably not the brightest place for me to be. So I shut the camera down, and I'm like, you know what? I grabbed a rather large knife, and I headed into the trees. I wanted to see if I could see something. And as I started heading into the trees, I could hear it moving away. I could hear it again on the other side of the cemetery, but it never got close to me again. And I was like, probably ought to just move on out of this area. One of the things I want to really say about LBL, and that it was really bizarre, excuse me, is it was different than any place I've ever been. I've been through the woods most of my life. I've hunted and fished and backpacked and camped all over the Ozarks and areas around. I've gone out through the Rocky Mountains, and if it's a rugged area in the United States to hunt and fish, I've probably been there. But LBL was different. We stayed just across the canal from the north end of LBL, a little town called Grand Rivers. But when you would cross the bridge into North LBL, you could feel it. You could feel the change. Just something about the place. Outside of LBL, over in Grand Rivers and around the campgrounds and stuff that were around where we were staying, you could see deer and possum and squirrels and fish and turtles. You saw animals everywhere. But as soon as you crossed into northern LBL, nothing. The entire time I was there, which was pretty much a week, I never saw one animal in the north end of LBL, not even roadkill. And that is bizarre. To not see any animals at all in a heavily forested area like that is really, really strange. And some of that areas back there in LBL are really, really densely wooded. It's one thing for someone to go to a park and say, yeah, there's a lot of trees here. We really like it. But it's totally different when you step out in the woods and everything is just wild and overgrown. Fallen trees, heavy thick cover on the ground of leaves, branches that are grabbing at your face, brambles. It was thick. It was hard if there wasn't a trail, it was very difficult to pick your way through parts of the LBL. Very, very dense, very foreboding place. And the infamous incident that most people are aware of with LBL, with the family of 4 that was supposedly killed back in 82, turns out I was within a few yards of the place and never knew it. I was looking for that spot. But there's the main road through LBL runs north to south. It's called the Trace. And there's an area, heads off to the east off of the Trace, called DeMumbers Bay. And it's just off that road to DeMumbers Bay. So I drove by the exact spot where that incident happened probably a dozen times, because I went down to DeMumbers Bay several times. But I did have some weird things happen to me personally down at DeMumbers Bay. My first night there, I decided I would just drive around. And my wife and my son were at the condo. And I went into LBL, and I had a little Dodge Grand Caravan minivan at the time. And I was carrying gear with me at this point. I wasn't wearing it, so if I got out of the van, it was going to be in the van. But I did take something to defend myself. So I drive down to Demumbers Bay, and there's nobody camping there. And these are all primitive campsites. There's no power hookups, no water hookups, not like you would expect when you go to a campground. These are all very primitive sites. So basically anything you take in, anything you need, you have to pack in. If you want electricity, you better have a generator because it's not out there. So I pulled down to the actual part of Demumbers Bay, which looks out over this little bay that comes off of I can't remember. I think it's Kentucky Lake. It's the lake on the east side. And, I'm just kind of looking around. I kind of pulled slowly around the parking lot with my headlights on bright. I didn't see anything. And there's a pretty big open area where people could camp. There was nobody there. So I pull down, and there's an old concrete boat ramp that leads down to the water. Where people could back trailers in and launch boats. So I kind of pulled down onto that ramp with my headlights playing out over the water. And I wasn't close to the water. I was probably 20, 30 yards up the ramp from the water. And I just stopped the van and got out and listened. And it was really quiet. So I walked down to the water's edge, and I had my cell phone with me and a little flashlight. And I was looking for tracks in the mud at the edge of the water. And that's a really great place to look for tracks in wild places. I found lots of partials, and I found some really interesting tracks over the years right at the edge of the water because everything needs water. So I'm not really finding anything right there at the boat ramp. So I kind of headed off a little bit to the north, following the shoreline, which there was just enough gap between the trees and the shoreline where I could walk without getting in the water. And I walked for a little ways, and I was probably 50 yards away from the van. Maybe not quite that far, but when it's over broken terrain, the distance, it gets nasty because it's hard to run on broken terrain, especially in the dead of night. But I used to use predator calls to attract, coyotes when I was younger. We would hunt coyotes for bounties because coyotes population had exploded, and they were a nuisance animal here in Missouri. And the Missouri Department of Conservation was putting a bounty out on bringing coyotes down because they were killing livestock. So I had used predator calls a number of times to lure in coyotes. So I pulled up a few of them that I had on my phone and looked around and thought, I'll try dying rabbit. Which is, if you ever heard the dying rabbit call, it's a rabbit screaming. Rabbits will scream. I mean, horrifyingly scream when they're under attack or dying. And they'll make a tremendous amount of racket. Most people don't realize how much noise a rabbit can make. But I didn't have a Bluetooth speaker. I was just playing it through the speaker on my phone. But the odd thing is I don't know if you've ever played any music or talked to somebody right at the edge of water at night. The acoustics over water at night act different than you wouldn't expect. Sound seems to travel at night over water far more than I've ever I can really explain. I'm sure there's physics behind it, but I've noticed this camping at rivers, and I've been, fishing on lakes. Sound just travels over water, especially at night. Sounds you would think would be almost inaudible at more than 20 feet away come in loud and clear. So I got really pretty good amplification on this dying rabbit call. So I played it and, let it run for about 20 seconds. And then I shut it off to listen, and I could hear something coming toward me in the woods, and it was moving pretty fast. It came at me from 3 different directions in the woods behind me. And so my only course of action was in the water or farther down the shore, one of the ways. I hadn't brought a firearm with me. And I'm like, yeah, this is probably not the greatest place to get caught, especially considering how far I am from the van. So I start making my way down the shore back to the van, and I can hear these things, whatever they are, still coming toward me in the woods. So I hustle up the ramp, jump in the van, slam the door and lock the door, fire the engine up, throw the headlights up on bright, and I back up into the campsite and let my bright lights play out across the woods from where I was just at. And I saw several sets of green eyeshine. And I've heard people say that Dogman eyeshine usually comes back either red or gold. This was green. I didn't see anything other than the eyeshine, and the eyeshine was high enough off the ground that it wasn't just a deer or something like that. Whatever these were coming toward me. They wanted to know what they were attracted by that dying rabbit call, and they were trying to get to me. And, if I hadn't gotten the van when I did, if I'd have been farther away from the van, I probably wouldn't have made it back to the van. And I learned a pretty valuable lesson. I don't care what the posted signs say. I'm not going unarmed anywhere like that again. told my wife about it. She goes, "You're an idiot. Don't be doing that anymore." But Demumbers Bay is a very creepy area, even in the daylight. Just something about that place. It's just got an energy all its own. And it was after I left LBL that I heard another story of a couple, a man and a woman that was supposedly killed right there in Demumbers Bay in the campground. There's several people have reported the story, but it supposedly was witnessed by a guy from the game and fish department who was out just at dawn fishing in Demumbers Bay, and he saw this thing creeping up on this couple as they were getting out of their tent. He was yelling at them, trying to get their attention, and before they saw it, it attacked them. And he didn't go after it because he figured he'd have just joined it. But he was basically told to shut up about it. And as a cop, basically what I do is I evaluate these stories, and I evaluate the person that's telling me the story, if I can take the account firsthand, and then I evaluate the details in a story. And as a writer, that's really, really helped me as well, because I look for inconsistencies in the story. I look for little things that don't make sense. And I've come across a number of stories over the years that I thought were just total hokum. But then you talk to some people and you see the fear in their eyes and the goose pimples on their arms as they're telling you the story. They're not making that up. They're reliving a horrific experience. And Demumbers Bay to me, is one of the creepiest places I've ever been. While we were there in LBL, while we were waiting for Nick to get there, I kind of walked around a little bit there at the little town called Grand Rivers. It's not a very big place. There's a couple of restaurants, a little bitty grocery store, and a few houses. Not a whole lot there. The resort we stayed at is there. It's called the Green Turtle Bay Resort. Really neat little place if you're ever in that area. It's a cool place to stay. But I wouldn't recommend going over an LBL by yourself. But as I was walking around Grand Rivers, I got one of two reactions from people if I asked about the LBL stories. Either they said, nope, never heard of anything like that, and then wouldn't talk to me anymore. Or they got angry and wouldn't talk to me anymore. I got thrown out of a bait shop when I asked a guy about it. He said, I don't want to talk about that, and you need to leave my store. And I was like, okay, this is bizarre. And he would not talk to me anymore. He didn't physically grab me and throw me out of his store. He just basically told me to leave. There was a little place there called Cave Pizza. They make a really good pizza. But the guy that was at the counter clammed up immediately when I started asking him about LBL. He's like, I don't know nothing about that place. I don't go over there. I stay out of there. The locals say that's a bad place. I don't know nothing about it. And that was all he would say. Then I ran into a deputy sheriff. And I won't say his name because he certainly didn't, give me the indication that he wanted to be on the record for anything. And I wouldn't out another cop. And I walked up and I introduced myself, told him I was a writer, and I was there researching the area. He's like, oh, you a big fisherman? Are you writing an outdoor type book? I said, no. I said, I'm writing about the incidents in LBL. And he got real quiet. So I took out my wallet and I showed him my credentials. I said, I'm a retired cop. I'm here investigating for a book, and I just wanted to get, an honest take on this. And he sat there for a second, and then he looked at me and he goes, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to pay attention. I said, okay. He goes, one cop to another, I would drop this. He said, I would not pursue this. And he turned and walked away, and he wouldn't talk to me about it anymore.
It's wild, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
We ended up staying a couple extra nights. We were only planning on staying 5 days, and we stayed at the resort. But as the fifth day was coming, I told my wife, I said, hey, can we stay a couple extra days? I'm still really not quite done. And she said, well, we can't get the condo that's already booked. So we looked around when the nearest hotel we could find was in a place called Paducah, Kentucky, which is about 10 minutes away. It really wasn't very far. So we got a hotel for the next couple of nights in Paducah and moved our stuff over there and went and got something to eat before I went back there that evening. And everybody in Paducah was willing to talk about it. In fact, when I was talking about it with some people, there were other people who would say, oh, you talking about what goes on in LBL? And they would come and tell me stories. I probably got 20 people telling me their stories. In Paducah, they're like, oh yeah, there's something bizarre going on over there. And one guy told me that he was, trolling, with his fishing boat, early one morning. And, he said, he rounded a little bend kind of into a little slough that goes back into the woods a little bit and right there along LBL. And he was, trolling motors are very quiet. And, he said that, he was just sitting there fishing and just moving into that bay, that little slough very slowly. And he saw this thing at the edge of the water. He said it looked like it was eating fish. He said, but when it saw me, he says, it stood up, and he said, it looked like a dang werewolf. It was completely black, and it came out in the water toward the boat. He said, it was coming. And I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, he says, I fired up the big engine and I got that there, and I don't fish over there anymore. I stick to this side of the lake. He said once he realized what was coming at his boat, he was all about, turning off the trolling motor, turning on the big motor, and putting as much distance as he could. He said it was between 6 and 7 feet tall. He said it wasn't built super strong, like people describe them as bodybuilders. He said this thing was built more like for speed, and dark colored, which oddly enough matches the description of the one I saw on my last day in LBL. He said it was coming through the water at a pretty high rate of speed. He said once it got to, water beyond it, up to its chest, it slowed it down. He said, but when it was like, hip deep in water, it was coming fast. He said, I don't hunt or fish over there anymore. He says, especially, you get close to dark. I don't want to be anywhere near that place. He said, decided it didn't want fish anymore. It wanted him. On our last day in the park, Nick and I actually saw one. Nick Valente and I actually saw one. We had gone down to Demumbers Bay and, looked around a little bit, didn't really see anything going on. There was a couple guys fishing, but nothing really going on in Demumbers Bay. And what we were doing is Nick has a big SUV. He's got an H3 Hummer and, with a good 4-wheel drive unit. So what we started doing is a lot of these primitive campsites set way back off the road in the trees. There's little, barely more than a trail where you can take a vehicle down to it. But a lot of these campsites are set back in the trees. And so we were driving back slowly, like 3 or 4 miles an hour, just creeping, looking through the trees for these campsites. Nick was looking on the left side. I was looking on the right side of the road. And, what we're hoping to see is either somebody camping that we could talk to, or maybe find a campsite we could look for tracks, or, worst case scenario, a campsite that looked like it had been abandoned or torn up. We did see a couple guys fishing at the low water bridge, but they didn't act like they wanted to talk at all. So we continued on, and as you leave Demumbers Bay, there's a little bit of the road, and then there's a concrete bridge that covers like an inlet. And on the other side of that concrete bridge, back toward the trace, is where we started slowing really down. And we were maybe 125 yards past that bridge, not far. And I was looking out the passenger side, and I had my phone in my hand, just like this, with the camera app up, ready to record something. In retrospect, I probably should have just been recording the whole time and, then went back and edited stuff out. But at the time, the phone I had didn't have a whole lot of memory, so I didn't want to run constantly. Every deer I'd ever shot while hunting, only reason I saw it is because it moved. If something is sitting dead still in the woods, we're not really trained our brains really aren't wired to spot it. So every deer I've ever got, I only realized it was there was because it was moving. When it was dead still, it was almost impossible to see. And that was the case I ran into with this. As we're driving down the road, I was looking out to the right through the trees, and I saw something that was maybe 30 yards off the road. And the undergrowth was thin enough right there at the edge of the road we could see back into the trees for a little bit. But it didn't really click what I was looking at until I started, as we started to pass it and I was looking beyond it. That's when it turned its head and looked right at me. And when it moved, I keyed right in on it. I instantly saw it. And I'm, still phone in hand. I'm hitting Nick in the shoulder, telling him to stop and look. And he slams on the brakes and looks. And I got a pretty good look at this thing. I saw it for 15 to 20 seconds. Nick probably saw it for in the ballpark of 10 to 15 seconds. And this thing, it was strongly built, but not like a bodybuilder. It looked like a dog on its hind legs. You could see the hocked legs. You could see the hand, because it had its right hand against a tree, like it was just leaning against this tree watching us. The head was roughly shaped like a wolf, but the snout was different. The snout looked more like a Rottweiler or a Mastiff. It didn't have the heavy jowls, but it was shorter and blunter, wider. It didn't look, it wasn't like a narrow snout like on a wolf or a collie or a German Shepherd. This was shorter and blunter. And I can tell you from owning a couple of Mastiffs, I can tell you the bite pressure those things have. I've seen them splinter femur bones from cattle. The bite pressure on that thing had to have been enormous. So I'm pointing at it. And again, the whole time I'm yelling and trying to get Nick's attention, never once thought of turning on that camera hand. Didn't even enter my brain. I mean, I was just totally, absolutely freaking out at what I saw. And Nick throws it in park. We pile out and this thing takes off. And it did kind of one of the weirdest runs I've ever seen. It didn't just turn around and take off running like we would. There was a ravine behind it that kind of dropped down back toward the lake. And it turned and did this kind of side to side bounding. It like sprang to the right, sprang to the left, sprang to the right, and then went down that ravine. And we could hear it smacking through bushes and everything. It was hauling. So we go trucking out there to where it was. And, that ravine was pretty rough. And we knew the two of us weren't going to be pursuing it down that ravine anytime soon, not without ropes. But it was just gone. I mean, incredibly fast. So I went back over to the spot where I'd seen it, right to the exact tree. And I was able to reach up and put my hand where its hand was, but it was like if I'd been leaning against the tree, my hand would have been lower. If you lean against a tree, your hand's going to be roughly shoulder level. It's going to be, comfortable level. That thing was the hand where his hand was slightly above my head. And I'm 5'10", so I estimated it to be between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. There was heavy leaf litter on the ground and you could see the impressions where he had ran. But there was too much clutter on the ground to get a print. And I looked over at Nick and he said, "Tell me you got that on camera." And that's when I looked down like, nope, never turned it on. After a number of people disappeared in there, oddly enough, the Conservation Department and the National Park Service reintroduced wood bison and elk to LBL. They're herds of wood bison and elk in the area that you're not allowed to hunt. Why would you introduce large game species in an area and not allow people to hunt them?
What are they feeding?
I think that's exactly what they're doing. I think by reintroducing large game species, they figured whatever was there would have an alternate food source. Yet people still go missing in LBL all the time. Most of the time it gets shut up like fast. Once in a while you'll catch an article about it. Miss Naomi Finn from Naomi Finn Storyteller, her and I were researching a story out of that area. And before the article got pulled from the internet, because we were able to find the article and read it, it was an autopsy report from a newspaper article. I talked about the autopsy. Said the autopsy showed death by animals. There's no conspiracy, so don't ask. Literally, the article said that.
Okay, so bizarre.
Yeah, why would you throw that in the article? I've seen lots of articles about missing people. There's the story of the bow hunter who was killed. Basically, he was ripped out of his tent. His bow was found shattered, and they found what was left of his body about a mile back in the woods away from his house. That's not mountain lion behavior. A mountain lion can drag an animal. It really can. But, it's not going to drag a 220, 230 pound grown man, miles back into the woods. It's going to find a place where it can get away from people and then start eating it. Coyotes don't do that. Coyotes attack and kill their prey and they will eat it right there. If you've ever come across a coyote kill, it's messy. There's pieces everywhere. You'll find bones. You'll find bits of flesh. You'll find hair. Coyotes are not clean. Don't leave a clean kill site. Wolves are similar. Wolves will eat their prey where they kill it. They won't drag it off. And none of these are supposed to really even be in LBL. They're not supposed to have any big predators other than supposedly bears. Never saw a bear while I was there. Never saw evidence of a bear. Doesn't mean they're not there. I just didn't see them. But bears don't generally do that either. A bear will bury its kill, like cover it with leaves and things like that to come back and feed on it later. But you don't hear about bears dragging their kill miles off into the woods. So whatever killed that bow hunter, is still pretty mysterious. Of course, they said it was a pack of wild dogs, but you get a lot of that in that area. It was wild dogs. There was just outside of LBL, there was a 13-year-old kid who was killed in his own yard and dragged half a mile up a bluff side. And they said that was wild dogs. Dogs don't do that. Dogs ain't going to drag a good-sized kid up a bluff. It's not happening. Wild dogs like that will drag it to where it's easy to eat, not that much effort to get it.
Now, some campsites have reports of this foul, musky odor waking people up in the middle of the night. And believe me, it's not the homeless being sent there from Portland, Oregon. This is an odor that just vanishes mysteriously by morning. And so by the late 1960s and 70s, this newly established LBL was really drawing a lot of outdoor enthusiasts from all over. One of the most compelling came from a hunter named Thomas Reed, who in the late 1990s had an experience of his own. This man had already spent decades hunting in LBL, and he was very familiar with just the sounds and the animal life. And so one November morning, he was up in his deer stand before sunrise, and he was about 20 feet up in a tree, perfectly still, just waiting for a deer to pass by. And as the first bit of dawn filtered through the trees, he noticed movement by about 80 yards away. And he went to raise his binoculars, and he saw something that really freaked him out, because there, standing on two legs, partially concealed by a thicket, was this tall, looming dark figure. He estimated it was at least 7 feet, with the distinctly canine head set on broad shoulders. And the creature was covered in this dark brown, almost black fur, and its ears were pointed and erect. As he looked at this thing, he noticed that it was kind of scanning the woods like it was hunting too. And it would sniff the air and then slowly turn its head from side to side. And at one point, Thomas claimed that it looked directly at his tree stand, and he was certain that it saw him. Instead of running away, Thomas said the thing began moving toward him. I mean, not directly, but in this wide arc, like it was trying to circle behind his position, which is even more terrifying. Thomas did not wait to see what would happen next. He climbed down and left the area as fast as he could. And when he got back to his truck, remember, it was still early morning, but he was done hunting for the day. And actually, Thomas wouldn't go back to that specific area of LBL for nearly 2 years after this. The only thing he could really say to sum it up was that for the first time in his life, he felt like he was the prey and not the hunter. In 2005, a couple of college students from Murray State University reported something pretty similar. They were camping in the northern section of LBL, right near Woodlands Nature Station. It was spring break, and they had hiked out to this secluded spot to camp for a few days. Now, on their second night, around 2 a.m, they awoke to what they described as a deep rumbling growl just outside their tent. One of the students, named Alex, thought it might be a black bear, which occasionally are seen in the area. But his friend Devin said it sounded like something bigger and deeper, nothing like the bears he'd heard at the zoo.
When John and I showed up on location to start filming for one of the hot spots where there's Bigfoot and Dogman activity, Border Patrol was parked in the middle of the road. We stopped and talked to them for a little bit and asked them if they'd seen anything weird. They said they've seen weird stuff out there all the time, but aren't allowed to talk about it. They said they could provide a phone number to a special department that would disclose what they could.
What do you think Dogman is? Do you think it's supernatural or flesh and blood?
You know, that's a slippery slope for some people. So with my experience, I 100% believe that it was supernatural. I think there's two kinds. I think you have your natural ones, the ones that you hear these experiences where the government has even called them their assets. I'm sure you've heard these before. I forget the one gentleman who drove the semi that shot one through his car door and killed it. He came back and one was pulling it back into the woods. He was approached by federal agents and they said, you destroyed one of our assets. Many other stories about governments and that. So I believe that there are supernatural kinds that may have been killed. Government does their DNA, mojo on them, and they've come up with something else. Or there's just, again, there's two kind of facets to these things.
In Ross County on April 25th, 2021, Mike Irwin was hiking with his cousin and his cousin's girlfriend in the Scioto Trail State Park, which is part of the Buckeye Trail. The day was fairly warm and sunny, around 67 degrees. About 3/4 of a mile into their hike, Mike's cousin wanted to go up on the ridge to the left of them and look around. They were in a deep valley, so they had to do a steep climb. They were almost to the top when they heard 2 loud cracks and a deep growling sound. When they looked in that direction, they saw a tall tree falling in their direction from the opposite hillside. They all started running down the hill and up the other hill. They located the tree that had been pushed over, but did not hear anything walk off. Mike started taking pictures in a full circle around him. They looked at the ground around the tree and found canine prints all around it that were as big as Mike's hand. They left the area, and when Mike got home and looked at his pictures, he noticed what he had captured. The moon phase that day was waxing at 96%. These stories are real. Do not take any chances in the woods. Always be aware of your surroundings, as people go missing in the parks all over this country.
And honestly, until I started doing the research in Arkansas with my partners down there, I really didn't give much thought to Dogman, and wasn't really interested in it. Didn't really, I can honestly say, I didn't really believe in it. But we started finding tracks that were very canine-like, that were very large, and we started getting things on the hidden cameras that we have. I mean, we were talking before the show, and we say the cryptids are crafty, so you have to be crafty too. I mean, we have cameras on trees, in trees, under trees, in brush piles, from all different, and our cameras started picking up things that we just couldn't explain. Camera shots that would be at 2 a.m, and late at night, of canine-like creatures, and things that we just could not explain. So it wasn't until doing my research down there that I really started to get on board with the Dogman phenomenon. Another thing that a lot of researchers experience, and my partners and I had to actually come up with a term for it, because it's talked about a lot in cryptid research circles, and we call it cryptid electronic interference. We call it CEI for short.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who may not know what CEI is, it is a phenomenon where electronic equipment such as recorders and cameras and drones seem to be affected, and batteries seem to be affected when cryptids are in close proximity to those devices.
Well, this was in 2019, as from asking my wife. And I was driving home from work. I work in Richmond, and I was on my way to Jackson. And when I got right about halfway in between, right after Stanton, come around a corner, pulled off to the side of the road because I saw something walking, standing up. It was very, very tall, ape-like, arms swayed. But when I pulled off to the side of the road and it kind of looked back at me, I could tell that it had a muzzle. It looked more like a bear than anything else, wolf or anything like that. It looked back at me, and when it come back around, it took off like a jaguar, just floating across the grass, just as quick as I've ever seen anything. And it was gone in probably 3 or 4 seconds.
How far away was it from you?
It was probably about 150 yards away.
And you stopped your car. Did you get out of the car, or did you stay in the car?
No, I didn't get out of the car. As soon as it was gone, I was on the phone with my wife. I was shook because it scared the crap out of me. It really did. It was huge.
And what makes you think it was not a bear or not a person?
Well, I'm from Harlan County. I've seen countless black bears. I go with my grandfather on 4-wheelers and look for them. I know what they look like. It was not a bear. And I've seen cats too, and I know what the cats look like, and it wasn't some form of that either. It was tall. It swayed when it walked. Its arms moved. And when it took off like a panther gate, where 2 feet, 2 arms were hitting at one time, and it just flew across the grass.
So when you first saw it, was it walking upright?
Yes, away from me. Yes, and arms swaying.
It was walking on 2 legs at first.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it walk on 2 legs?
It was 2 or 3 seconds. Once I pulled off to the side of the road, I think it heard me.
And what color was it?
Brown, dark brown. Almost, you could almost say black, but it was definitely brown. Yes. Like a really, really dark chocolate brown.
Now, when I first talked to you on the phone, you mentioned something about the body. Mm-hmm. Can you describe the body again?
Well, the body was very muscular, like a bodybuilder. Like it could rip you apart if you wanted it. But it was huge. And then it went down into, and it was definitely a humanish. It walked like a bear doesn't walk like that. It walked.
Right.
100%.
Could you see anything else like a tail or ears?
No, I didn't.
No. And when it ran away, you said it was fast.
very fast, like a cheetah.
Like a cheetah.
Yeah.
And where did it go when it ran?
Straight to the woods. It was out in front of it.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think of any other questions that I might have. Did you, sorry, there's an ATV.
Yeah.
We are in Kentucky, so we have ATVs everywhere. Who did you tell right after you saw it?
I got on the phone with my wife. Yeah. I've told one other person, and that was a guy I work with. And I only told him after he started talking to me about some of the stuff that he has heard and seen, and he's huge into this, and he sent me tons of podcasts afterwards. And my wife has always been really into it, and I've always been the kind of person that's like, okay, whatever, all right. I was never the person that was, yeah, they're out there or whatever. No, I am now.
Yeah, I can see why. Now the muzzle, I know this is a great distance. Can you guess how big the muzzle was?
It was about the same. It wasn't very, very long. It was more like a bear muzzle. It was a little shorter, but it was still there. It was definitely there.
Right. And the body, you keep talking like it was humanoid. Could you see shoulders or the leg?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole thing swayed when it walked.
Mm-hmm.
The arms was moving, swayed. You could tell if it's what I would imagine somebody in an ape suit, or a very muscular person in an ape suit looks like.
And how long were the arms?
They went farther down than ours would. They were huge. I know they were huge.
Yeah. And the legs were, describe the legs.
Very, very, very muscular.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, but kind of like the Mountain. If you've seen the Mountain on Game of Thrones,
right,
how big he is, just muscular all the way down.
Yeah, big.
That's what it was like.
So this had to be pretty significant for you to stop your car and look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm used to, if you see deer on the side of the road, I'm a hunter. If you see deer on the side of the road, you see bear on the side of the road, you kind of pull off and you look at them. You try to, if you can. If you can, you're not disturbing them or something like that. So I thought at first that this was a bear, like a bear standing up. And I was like, oh, man, they're already over here. Because I've been in Harlan County and they've been there for years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pulled over and it was walking, I instantly knew that it wasn't a bear. And I was just kind of shocked. It was kind of struck dumb for a minute. And then when I pulled over and looked away and it took off, I was scared because it was fast.
Yeah.
Fast.
And the hair, do you recall how long the hair was?
No, it was shaggy like a bear, not really, really long. It looked more like a dog, like a bear or a dog.
Short haired.
Yeah.
But again, very muscular, shoulders, long arms.
Yep.
Not big and fat like a bear.
Nope.
Walking on two legs,
mm-hmm.
which bears don't typically walk too far on two legs.
Mm-mm.
This was walking at first, which is odd. And it looked back at you.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had that sighting. Yeah, it might have been a Dogman.
Yeah.
More than a Bigfoot, because Bigfoot have prognatheism. It's a little bit, but if you saw a muzzle at that distance, it kind of fits the Dogman category.
It does sound like it. Do you think it saw you?
Oh yeah, that's why it ran. I think it was fine until I pulled off, and maybe the rumble strip or whatever, but it definitely, it heard me, turned around, looked at me, and then took off. It didn't wait long enough to actually check and see what I was, but it saw me and took off.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think you might have locked eyes with it?
Mm-mm. No.
Too far away.
Yeah, and I'm inside my car, and it's daylight. Yeah, there's no way.
I revisited where this happened about 1.5 years ago. I hadn't been back in those many, many years. I found out there's Indian mounds there, Adena Indians, which were very common in this part of Ohio. I've read where your Dogman, for some reason, are found or seen frequently where there's Indian mounds. So I don't know. I don't know what to say to that.
if you believe the aspect of a dogman werewolf creature being more supernatural than natural, you can't hardly go anywhere here and not have a Native American settlement. It just lends itself to that angle of these creatures being, the guardians of the Native American burial mounds or grounds.
Today, we have an anonymous dogman tipster.
So we lived down in coastal North Carolina. We were walking down the road, and my wife had a flashlight. There's no street lamp, so it gets really, really dark at night. And we were in a stretch of the road where it's all woods on both sides of us. She heard something, and so she put her flashlight on it, and sure enough, clear as day, like right in the side of the berm, is this big. Again, I mean, in the moment, no clue, but it looked like sort of like a werewolf, or now I know sort of like a dogman type creature. I mean, it was big, small deer size ish, but just it's weird to think about because it's like almost like you see in the movies where it was like muscular and just ripped. And hairy on the back, but you could tell like the hind legs and the whole like torso was just
jacked. That's a lot of people say is just jacked. The upper torso, very muscular. Now, talk about height.
So,
was it on all fours? It was on all fours. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was on all fours. I mean, it was big, and it just was in the berm, and it looked at us, and then just bounded across the street and just into the woods.
All right, we're out here in Glenny, Michigan, and we're investigating some crazy sounds. As you guys can hear, it's almost a full moon. Let's see. Should we call animal control on this one? We got the dogs out too. I think. It might be the full moon, so we've had reports of Wendigo being
view. Wait. Shh. What is that? Shh. What is it? Hey, get over here. Get over here, Rafe. What is that? What is that? Stay behind me. What is it? Are you kidding me? All right, let's go, Rafe, go, on, sorry, so let's step, all right, on, listen. What is it? What is it? Is it following us? Stay right there. Go.
Thank you for watching. If these Dogman encounters sent a chill down your spine, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments below. As always, stay safe, stay aware, question everything, and remember, out there in those woods, something might be watching.